breaking and entering, drunk and disorderly, law and order. A former prosecutor and a defence lawyer, not your typical pairing. And the result? Conversations about crime and punishment that are guaranteed to get you thinking.
Welcome to Justice Matters, a weekly podcast with Lizzie Green and Joe Crowley. Our episodes are available every Monday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify and YouTube. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Justice Matters Pod for clips. Enjoy the episode.
This episode contains descriptions of capital punishment, drug offending and mental health issues. Listener discretion is advised. Hello, Lizzie.
Hello, Joe.
How are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing okay. Now, we are talking about a very interesting topic. Not that we don't always do that.
Always.
Schapelle, Corby.
Schapelle, Corby, a blast from the past.
And the Bali Nine.
The Bali Nine.
It sounds like a band name, doesn't it? And they're really locals because, I don't know, people probably know we're Queenslanders and record on the Gold Coast, but she's a Gold Coast local.
Yes.
And a number of the Bali Nine weren't they?
Well, I don't actually know for sure. Yes, okay. Some of them were definitely Brisbane.
Yeah.
Maybe Ipswich.
Switch, yep.
But I wanted to talk about this because I'm sure everybody's aware the Bali Nine have been back in the media because the remaining 5 members of the Bali Nine were returned to Australia just before Christmas from their Indonesian prison. You would have heard about that?
I did. I saw one of them in particular. I don't know if you're going to talk about it because he had some charges awaiting his arrival when he got back to Australia.
Oh,
you didn't see that?
I didn't see that.
He got, not further punished.
Oh, he has had substantial time in prison.
Yeah, I think they felt he'd probably been punished enough.
And look, part of me wondered why we want to talk about this because at the end of the day, these are people who broke the law by smuggling drugs and they were sentenced under the law of the country they were in. And, what's unfair about that? But I think part of it for me is that if they had committed those offences here in Australia, their outcomes would have been so incredibly different. And I think that's where Australians became invested and interested. And Schapelle Corby, for example, was a huge stir in the media for a long time with all of her Indonesian legal battles. And I think it is because it is such a harsh regime for drug offending in Indonesia as compared to Australia.
Yeah, although I think importing drugs into Australia, I've seen some pretty stiff sentences with that, up to 20 years. So how long did they actually, just remind me of the timeline, when did they get convicted?
So Schapelle Corby was sentenced in May 2005.
Gosh, okay.
And the Bali Nine actually were charged, I think, like a month before she was sentenced and then had their legal proceedings occur after that. So quite close in time overall. Yeah. So I thought, maybe as a word of warning for young travellers or any travellers, just a little refresher as to how badly things can go if you do not follow the laws.
Yes.
Yeah. So we'll start with Corby. And that's because her case was first time-wise. So she flew into Bali on October 8, 2004, and she was arrested after customs officials found 4.2 kilograms of cannabis in her boogie board bag. Yes. Yeah. She was charged and convicted of drug smuggling and she was sentenced to 20 years by the Denpasar District Court. There was a few little legal appeals and sentence amendments and reinstatements along the way, but it was a 20-year sentence.
Yes. I've never seen photos of how that was packed in the boogie board, but I would have thought 4.5 kilos of marijuana would be pretty obvious in a boogie board bag.
It's just such a huge amount.
Boogie boards do not weigh that very much. They're made of foam.
Well, and the weight
You're already doubling the weight.
Issue was one of Corby's biggest sticking points because things weren't weighed.
Oh, exactly how much she had in there.
Well, no, because we'll get into it, but one of her arguments was that somebody else put that in there. And if they compared the weights of her luggage from when she left Sydney to when she arrived in Bali,
The weight was the
they
same.
would see the difference.
Yeah.
They didn't weigh it.
Oh.
Yeah.
But also you'd notice when you picked up your boogie board bag, or did she not get it? It was picked up as it came out of the plane or something.
Well,
you're pulling it off
through,
you'd notice 4.5 kilos.
You would think. I mean, that's the size of a baby.
I'm sure that would double the weight of the bag.
But if you're juggling other bags as well, it's not like it was her only bag. Anyway,
And P.S., who takes a boogie board on holidays? Like, really?
I'd say lots of people would.
Yeah, sure. If you're camping in Australia or going on a beach holiday in Australia, who takes one internationally?
No, but people go on surfing holidays all the
time.
Yeah,
but a surfboard's, made of fiberglass. It's very different from a boogie board. I mean,
I think you're insulting all the boogie board
I'm going to get some
experts
angry
out there because it is a
messages.
skill in its own right.
I love boogie boards. I love it. I used to have so much fun as a kid, but I'm just saying.
Some people prefer it to surfing.
Sure, but what just buy one over there, or I don't know, rent one over there. They're not that technical piece of kit like
I think we're getting stuck on the wrong issue here. Okay,
going down a rabbit hole.
Yes. All right. So she was born in 1977.
Okay. Yep.
And she was described as a fun-loving, independent person, and she was on her way to visit her sister who lived in Bali. So she'd been to Bali a few times before.
Yeah.
She was, according to some sources, having this last holiday before she came home to help care for her father who had been diagnosed with cancer.
Oh, gee.
She'd saved hard for that trip. She had dropped out of school in grade 11. She was enrolled in a TAFE course to do hair and beauty therapy, I think, something like that. And she was working in her family's fish and chip shop and Coles. And so she'd saved hard for this holiday. It was, something she'd looked forward to. Maybe that's why she didn't just buy a boogie board.
Yeah, okay.
Anyway, so she and her brother and two friends flew from Brisbane to Bali. They transited through Sydney. When she arrived in Bali, she was stopped by customs officers and they opened the bodyboard bag, which was unlocked, and found a double plastic vacuum sealed bag which contained the cannabis.
Yep.
Now, as far as I know, there was no CCTV retrieved or pursued in relation to this process and her arrest.
Got it.
It was claimed by the arresting customs officer that she had said, "No, I have something."
Oh, so she declared something.
As she tried to push away the hands of the officer while he was opening the bag.
Yeah.
But she's always denied having said this.
Yes.
And her lawyers questioned the English language abilities of that officer in question to say he may have misheard or it wasn't what he thought.
But what does it matter? I mean, she has the drugs on her in the bag.
Well, that's true. Well, it matters because she said she didn't know it was there.
No, okay.
She said she didn't put it there. So if they heard her say, "No, I have something," then it tends to indicate she had an awareness.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Her brother and her friends testified that they had seen her pack the bag before leaving for the airport and that only the flippers and the bodyboard were inside at that time. But, that clearly wasn't the case when they opened it. So she was given representation, and interestingly, the Australian government offered the services of two Queen's Counsel on a pro bono basis.
Wow, okay, interesting.
And they argued that she had no knowledge of that cannabis until customs officials at the airport found it. So
Sorry, I was just going to say the position, I don't know in Indonesian law, but in Australian law, I mean, as you know, Lizzie, because I'm sure you teach this stuff, is that if it's in your bag, for example, you're deemed, you're the starting position of the court is that you know it's there. You can then prove that you don't know it's there. It's a sort of reverse onus.
Yes.
So it was the same sort of thing over there. She had to prove that she didn't know it was there.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Which is very difficult.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And I guess because with drug offending, and I say this to my students, most offenders' first claim is, "Oh, it's not mine. I didn't know it was there."
Yeah.
That's the knee-jerk reaction.
Yeah.
So, but so her defense centered on the theory that she had become an unwitting drug courier for what was supposed to have been an interstate shipment of drugs between Brisbane and Sydney in Australia.
Right.
And there was,
Seems unlikely. I mean, she's picking because she's on a domestic flight, Brisbane to Sydney. She's then collecting her bags and rechecking in.
That's right.
So if the drugs are in the bag there, presumably you're realising that it's 4.5 kilos heavier than it was.
Well, her lawyers said the cannabis was meant to have been removed in Sydney, but there was a whole lot of convoluted evidence from certain officials who said, oh, there were practices like that, but then they were later disciplined and retracted. And, this has been one of the most messy, muddy versions and stories of any kind of drug offending. So the 4 bags belonging to Corby and her companions were not weighed individually in Brisbane, but there was a total weight of 65 kilos recorded. The Bali Police and Customs did not record the weight of the bags, despite requests from Corby to do so that they could compare that what she'd put in was different to what turned up. But at the end of the day, she was charged and had to deal with that. Drug possession was and still is one of the most serious crimes in Indonesia, and Corby was facing life in prison or the death penalty. In Indonesia, they take the view there is no distinction between marijuana, heroin and cocaine, which is different to us. We have Schedule 1 and Schedule 2 drugs.
Sure, what's marijuana's in
Schedule 2?
Sure, but we have ridiculous things that steroids are, some of the steroids are Schedule 1, and so they're treated exactly the same as cocaine. I mean, I just think that's ridiculous.
Well, I know, but we do distinguish between marijuana and...
Sure, but we also make some silly distinctions.
Okay. And the death sentence is available for dozens of offences, but it's usually only applied to serious premeditated murders, terrorism, and drug offences. That's how seriously they take drugs. It. That's right.
Yeah. I wonder how that's helping their stats. I mean, in our capital punishment episode, we said that it actually doesn't deter crime. The death penalty.
Well, so. The rationale that I could see is that in Indonesia, trafficking drugs is seen as a form of mass murder because of the deaths caused by drugs.
It's just ridiculous.
Why?
How many people are smoking marijuana die from it?
No. Well, okay.
How many people who take cocaine die from it? I mean, really?
A lot, I would say.
Really? Cocaine?
I don't know. Drugs are bad.
Oh, I'm not saying drugs are good. I'm saying that's a ridiculous rationale.
That South Park episode where they just kept saying, don't do drugs. Drugs are bad. All right. So at the beginning of her trial, it seems like the majority of Australians believed that our Schapelle, as she was coined, was a naive innocent who became the unwitting victim of stealthy criminals and a corrupt foreign legal system.
Okay.
She certainly was the type of accused person who could, tug on the heartstrings. She looked so distraught all the time. She was pretty, she was young, all of those things.
Yep.
She made pleas in the court to be released. At the defence's last address to the court in April 2005, she said, I cannot admit to a crime I did not commit. And to the judges, my life at the moment is in your hands, but I would prefer if my life was in your hearts.
Oh, interesting.
I know.
I wonder if she came up with that herself or if her lawyers wrote it for her. She had some PR people.
That was not revealed.
No.
She also wrote to the case's prosecutor and the judges with a request for leniency. They broadcast the verdict live
in Australia.
Yeah. And also in New Zealand. And it included covering the 80-page trial outline, the verdict and the sentencing. And so she was found guilty and sentenced to 20 years.
I'm wondering if part of the reason for the interest in her case is because by then the Bali Nine have been arrested, haven't they? And they're in jail facing trial and they're very much looking at the death penalty.
Yes.
So, I wonder how much both cases feed into each other in terms of their notoriety.
It was obviously a really tough time for Australian travellers
to Bali.
Yeah. She was also fined approximately 12,663 Australian dollars, with an additional 6 months if that was unpaid. I'm guessing she wouldn't have been able to pay it.
No.
And defence and prosecution both appealed to the High Court. The defence appealed for a retrial. The prosecution appealed for life in prison.
Okay.
There were some unpleasant consequences after that verdict, whereby a letter was delivered to the Indonesian embassy in Canberra containing an unknown substance. It was later found to be non-toxic, was considered to be a hoax, but it was connected with that conviction of Corby. And the Indonesian Foreign Ministry described the attack as a sorry and cowardly attempt at intimidating Indonesia. So things were unpleasant, I think, politically between Indonesia and Australia as well. Corby wrote to the then Australian Prime Minister John Howard for help, saying that as a father and as a leader, I plead for your help. Howard said, I feel for her. I understand why there's a lot of public sympathy for her. I would simply say that I hope justice is done and it's a fair and true verdict. I would ask the rhetorical question, my fellow Australians, if a foreigner were to come to Australia and a foreign government were to start telling us how we should handle it, we would react very angrily to that.
Yes, well, I think he's absolutely right. I mean, I think the question, I mean, his plea for justice and that it was a fair verdict, I think is probably a sensible thing to say.
Interestingly, or maybe not so surprisingly, after her conviction, sales of luggage locks increased.
Yes.
And some people began filming their luggage as a precautionary effort.
Interesting. Well, my recollection is that when that whole bag wrapping business got going, you know, you go to the airport and they wrap your bag in Glad wrap.
Oh, yeah, maybe.
Yeah, I actually did that after the Schapelle Corby thing once.
Well, see, there you go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Lessons to be learned.
Yeah, I'm always for locking bags.
Yeah.
My wife never locks a bag, and she was stuffed so much stuff in it, and then you have to sort of sit on it to close it, and I'm worried it'll bust open.
Well, so that's good because there's no room to plant anything in there.
The drug dealers would go, why did we open this bag? We're just not going to get this closed.
Yeah, that's a good tactic.
Yeah, probably is very sensible.
There were a few hearings post-conviction. So firstly, the High Court ruled the case should be reopened, allowing the defence to call new witnesses, but that didn't result in any material change.
So this is the High Court in Indonesia.
In Indonesia, yes.
The defence could call new witnesses. It's the civil system over there, I'm pretty sure, isn't it? So the inquisitorial system.
Yeah, no jury.
Yeah. Well, they don't have jury in Papua New Guinea and other places, even though it's a common law system. But I think my recollection is because it was Dutch, wasn't it? Yeah.
Why do you ask me history? I do not know.
Okay, sorry.
Geography and history, not my strongest points.
I know. I'm going down some rabbit holes here.
In October 2005, the High Court reduced her sentence to 15 years, but then in January 2006, the Indonesian Supreme Court overturned that reduction. Then she made an extraordinary appeal to the Denpasar District Court. That was sent to the Supreme Court, who rejected the appeal.
Wow, okay.
In 2010, a clemency appeal for full remission on humanitarian grounds was made to the Indonesian president, citing her deteriorating mental health.
Mm-hmm.
And in May of 2012, so 2 years later, the president granted a 5-year reduction to her sentence.
Mm-hmm.
So she was released from prison in February 2014 after serving 9 years.
Mm.
Her parole conditions required her to remain in Bali for the remainder of her term.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yes. And she obviously could not use or distribute drugs. She had to report monthly to the Corrections Board and be subject to SNAP inspections of her residence.
Okay, so she was released on parole. Okay, and then she had to serve, the rest on parole. Interesting.
And so in 2017, she came back to Australia.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. My recollection is she became something of a sort of a local celebrity. People would go to Bali and then try and visit her. And
I think there were crowds and crowds of people, and people in court just crammed in to watch these proceedings. So the Indonesian media dubbed her the Ratu Marijuana, or the Queen of Marijuana.
The Queen of Marijuana.
Apparently inspired by the fact that she was a beauty student at TAFE.
Of course,
yep.
Yes.
And, you know, I wouldn't call her a celebrity, but she was certainly very much well known, and her case was very closely followed. Local Indonesians couldn't understand why there was so much interest. People asked, who is she, rather than what has she done, and they couldn't work out why this convicted drug dealer was getting, or possessor of drugs was getting fated in this way. They just saw it as an ordinary drug case. There have been documentaries about her, one of them called The Ganja Queen.
The Ganja Queen. I think that's better than the Marijuana Queen.
Well, it's got a ring to it, hasn't it?
Yeah.
She had received a lot of mail, but a lot of it was also hate mail. So
Really?
in this documentary, she laughs incredulously while reading hate mail. And she quotes, "Word around Australia is they call you the Brisbane Beauty. I call you a common whore and a slut."
Oh, is this from the local people sending a hate mail?
I don't know where it's from.
Wow.
So there was also another.
I think if you're taking time to write a letter and post it internationally to abuse somebody else, you really have, you got to get a hobby, like get something else to do.
100%. Well, I don't understand
even TV.
it.
But I suppose Netflix wasn't around then. Switch the TV
Yeah.
on. Got to be something on that's better to do than that.
There was another investigative journalist, Eamon Duff, who talked a lot about the Corby family and about her father being a seasoned drug runner and that she was a mule.
Yeah.
But the publisher was forced to pay the Corbys and their lawyers nearly $1 million in a settlement deal after they sued for defamation.
Wow, okay, yeah, there you go.
So she was treated for depression while she was in prison. I think we can't underplay how hard it must have been. I mean, it's hard for anyone in prison, absolutely, but I think she was, shell-shocked, and she had her sister there but no other family, and,
Yeah, and I mean, prisons in Australia can be dangerous, violent places, and there's very strict rules around that, not always followed in terms of behaviour in jail and who they employ as guards and all that kind of stuff. I'm just not sure that the standard of corrections in Indonesia would be as high.
No. So she did end up having a relationship with the guy she met while she was in prison. Okay. They stayed together for 16 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very significant. Up in 2022. You can go on this website called Schapelle Corby, The Hidden Truth. Who placed the marijuana in Schapelle's bag and why?
Dun, dun, dun.
I know. There's a whole lot of suggested alternatives to it simply being that Schapelle Corby put it in the bag.
Occam's razor, the simplest answer is most likely correct.
But so I guess today, where is she at? She's just living quietly.
On the Gold Coast, I think, isn't she?
Well, I think she was on the Gold Coast. She was making clocks, the most recent news article.
Wow, okay, I did not see that coming.
Resin clocks with beautiful...
Oh, not the actual mechanism. She's sticking a clock in some resin. Right, okay. Yeah. Not that I'm sure that's very talented, but I just had a view of her.
And apparently it was doing very well, but the latest news article I could find about her was saying that sadly she can no longer make clocks, but it didn't say why.
No.
She did appear on SAS Australia and Dancing with the Stars.
What is SAS?
That show where they bring in people who are well known or known.
Yeah.
And it's run by the military, and they have to do all the and they
like I'm a celebrity, get me out of here kind of thing.
Yeah, like I think the main guy's name is Ant Middleton or something like that, and he's tough. Like he would terrify me, and he broke her on that show.
Sure, that wouldn't be hard to do. You just say do 500 push-ups, that'll break it. 99.
No, mentally, because they take them with the hood over their head.
Oh, for God's sake.
Yeah, no, it's really full on. But Dancing with the Stars, I think, was possibly a better experience.
Sure, how much I never watched, but was she a good dancer?
Well, better than I would have been.
Okay,
I'm not a boring dancer.
No, okay.
But she does. I'm going
to say that I think Schapelle Corby is the same age as my wife. I don't know what that means in terms of your age. I don't want to give away your age on air, but
close.
Yeah. So interesting. Yeah. I think you'd be a good ballroom dancer.
Thanks, Joe. So I also looked at a couple of cases from Australia to see how different the sentence might have been if she'd been dealt with here.
4.5 kilos possess, or is this on importation?
Well, possess. No, she was convicted of smuggling.
Yeah, so that'd be
trafficking.
Trafficking. Yeah. Well, it'd be okay, but that's of 9.
So 9. Just to give you an idea, so in 2017, a 65-year-old man was convicted of trafficking 17 kilos of commercial quality cannabis.
Yes.
He was on parole at the time for previous trafficking charges. Jeepers. He had a criminal history. He got 9 years with a non-parole period of 6 years, 9 months.
Yeah.
In 2014, a 34-year-old man was convicted of 13 counts of trafficking and supply cannabis and related charges, got 7 years with parole eligibility at 2.5 years.
Wow.
And in 2008, so a bit closer to Corby's case, a 48-year-old man was convicted of trafficking in cannabis and other less serious offences. Total amount of cannabis was approximately 4 kilos. He got 7 years imprisonment with parole eligibility after 2 years, 9 months, and he had a minor history of drug offending. So massive difference.
Oh, massive.
Massive. Yeah. So that was Corby.
Yeah.
So then let's have a look at what happened to the Bali Nine.
This is much sadder.
Yeah, so this is an overview of their case. So April 2005, a month before Corby was sentenced, 9 Australians were arrested in Bali for attempting to smuggle 8.3 kilos of heroin from Indonesia to Australia.
Okay.
Someone else reported it as 8.4.
And so they were picked up they were trying to leave Indonesia, coming to Australia, and they got picked up in Indonesia.
Yes. In February 2006, the alleged ringleaders of that group of 9, Andrew Chan, Myron Sukumaran, were sentenced to death. The other members received various sentences. So the only female, Renee Lawrence, got 20 years. The remaining offenders, Si Yi Chen, Michael Chuga, Tan Nguyen, Matthew Norman, Scott Rush, and Martin Stevens were all sentenced to life in prison.
Jeepers.
And I apologise for my mispronunciation of those names. I guarantee I got them wrong.
Right. That sounded all right to me.
So the end result for all of them, I'll tell you and then we'll go into the details. But Chan and Sukumaran were executed by firing squad in April 2015.
Yeah, jeepers.
Multiple appeals for clemency had been denied.
Yeah.
Nguyen died of stomach cancer in 2018 while still serving his life sentence.
That's right, yeah.
Renee Lawrence was released on parole in 2018 after her sentence was reduced. She was deported to Australia.
Yep.
And, of course, the remaining 5 were repatriated to Australia December last year after 19 years in prison.
December 2024.
Their life sentences were commuted upon return.
Yeah.
So, yes, a much sadder story overall.
Well, for the 2 who were executed, yeah. I mean, I'm sure you've probably done this, but I'd be interested to see the comparable sentences of what they would have got.
I have
I know you do because you're so good at preparing this stuff, yes. Okay.
Okay, so let's go back and look what happened. So 4 of the group who were charged and convicted, Martin Stevens, Renee Lawrence, Scott Rush, Michael Chugaj, I really don't know how to say his name. I don't know,
just have a crack at it.
They were found at Denpasar Airport with packages of heroin strapped to their bodies.
Yeah.
While the another 3, so Chen, Nguyen and Norman, were arrested at a hotel in possession of about 300 grams of heroin. And the final 2, Andrew Chan, Myron Sukumaran, were also arrested at the airport in relation to these matters. So the connection was established. The value of the drugs involved was estimated at about 4 million Australian dollars.
Yeah.
All of them were aged between 18 and 28 at the time of the arrests. It's not entirely clear how these 2 groups from Sydney and Brisbane respectively are linked, but several of the Bali Nine were employed with Urest Australia, a multinational catering company, and maybe there was some connection there. Rush and Sugaj claim they were recruited by Nguyen while socialising at a karaoke bar in Brisbane. Rush had met Nguyen 6 months earlier while fishing. Rush travelled to Sydney with Nguyen to attend a 21st, and he was then introduced to Sukumaran. And several days later, plans were made to travel to Bali.
Yeah, so I'm guessing that it's easy to buy heroin in Bali, and then that you get it back into Australia by
and in fact
strapping it to your body. Apparently,
I saw before Christmas Fiji apparently is this massive, intermediary for heroin. I think
really,
it is. Yeah.
So they don't grow it; it comes in from
is it
Afghanistan or something? Okay, and then it.
Yeah, I've heard about
They're the clearinghouse for heroin in the South Pacific. Interesting.
All right, so they didn't all arrive together. They arrived over a couple of days. They all got introduced at the hotel where Chan and Sukumaran were staying, and they were being observed during their stay. So police noted the group would spend a large amount of time indoors in their hotel rooms. And they met again on April 16, so 10 days after the first arrivals in Bali. And that was meant to be, according to police, a final briefing. And then April 17, they get arrested the next day at the airport.
But you might be going to cover this, but it's a case that the Indonesian police will watch them because they've been tipped off by the Australian Federal Police.
Yes.
And this, I think, is the most distressing part of the whole case.
So the Australian Federal Police gave the Indonesian authorities information about this group that included their names, passport numbers, information relating to their links to possible illegal drug trade, and that led to the surveillance in Indonesia. They worked out who they thought had supplied the heroin to Sukumaran. It was an Indonesian woman. She was believed to have left Bali on April 18, one day after the arrests, was briefly detained, but was released when paperwork was not in order for her to be extradited back to Indonesia, and she was gone.
Right.
So, head of the surveillance team later testified in court during their trials that police were initially unaware that Sukumaran was part of the group, as original information from the Australian Federal Police did not mention him by name. Indonesian police assumed he was Chan's bodyguard because he seemed to be accompanying him throughout Bali. So he wasn't initially on their radar.
Wow.
So the day that they got arrested, Chan was actually removed from a commercial flight about to depart the airport for Australia. So he would have thought he was so close to getting away.
Well, except he's obviously got to get through customs in Australia. Yes.
Well, true. But would have been preferable to be caught there.
No, but this is my point. Are you going to talk more about this, the Federal Police? You are? Should I?
A little bit. You might have more to add. He had several mobile phones in his possession, but he was carrying no drugs when he was arrested. He was believed to be the person responsible for organising and collecting the heroin and dispersing it to his mules.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Interesting.
All right. So there was apparently clear evidence that Sukumaran was the main organiser and Andrew Chan was the recruiter of the others to act as the drug mules. They were offered between 10 to 15,000 Australian dollars each to carry out the smuggling.
The mules were?
Yes. Yeah. There was word from the head of the Bali Police Drug Squad who said that they would seek to have all 9 charged with offences which carry the death penalty. He revealed to the media, I think, or to the court at least, that several of the 9 had previously used false passports, suggesting they'd acted as drug couriers before.
What?
Mm-hmm.
I'd be interested to know what evidence you had to base that on.
Yeah, Indonesian police said Chan was the mastermind and that if they hadn't followed his instructions, there were threats against them. So, really made him out to be this kingpin, sort of not mafia, obviously, but drug boss.
Sure, but if they're proceeding with the death penalty for all 9, what does it matter about painting one of them worse than the others? You're treating them all as...
I wonder if it's because he didn't get found with any drugs on him. So they had to really build that case.
Well, I mean, I think that is just a bit of character assassination in the media. That's not, where that doesn't prove any of the elements of the offence.
No, I know. All right, so the AFP had suspicions of Sukumaran, Chan, Lawrence and Norman before they went to Bali. Believed that they were part of a larger syndicate that had smuggled a large amount of heroin from Indonesia to Australia in 2004. So when they travelled to Indonesia again in 2005, they were watching the AFP and then decided to alert the Indonesian police.
But isn't it the case that some of the Brisbane connection of Bali Nine actually approached their parents were concerned about them and thought this is what they're going to do and approached a lawyer, and that lawyer then approached the Federal Police and told them.
Yes, so that also happened.
Yeah.
And the Federal Police didn't intervene, didn't act on that, let them go.
Sorry. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Oh, I suppose you could probably try and build a sort of an attempt to import or conspiracy charge or something. But I mean, I think let them go, fine. But don't tell the Indonesians. Wait till they get back.
And that's what the parents of a lot of
catch them when they get back.
That's right.
And the Australian Federal Police didn't do that. They completely dogged them and dob them into the Indonesian authorities, knowing that it's a capital offence over there.
That's right.
And so the Australian Federal Police have blood on their hands as far as I'm concerned. I think it was an utter disgrace on that service.
Yes, because the outcome was so vastly different than they would have faced here in Australia.
Yeah.
So Scott Rush and Renee Lawrence's parents openly criticised the AFP for allowing the Indonesian police to arrest them rather than allowing them to fly to Australia and arrest them here, which was a perfectly viable
could have done it
option.
easy as pie.
On April 24, 2005, Mick Keelty, who was the Australian
Kelty, that's him,
was the Australian Federal Police Commissioner at the time, said that the AFP would hand over all evidence they had obtained against the Bali Nine.
Yeah, there you go, doubling down on his completely inhumane act, yes.
Yep. Renee Lawrence's father said in October 2005 he wanted to meet the police commissioner face to face. He said, as far as I'm concerned, and excuse the expression, he is an asshole.
Yeah, I would have said something a bit worse than that, but yeah, I totally agree.
He said, these kids were forced into this. They should have either been arrested at the airport here or followed to get the big guys. I don't know how they can sleep at night.
No, I'm not sure on what basis they'd be arrested here, but, you know.
So there were some legal proceedings initiated in the Federal Court of Australia against the AFP. Scott Rush, Renee Lawrence, Martin Stevens and Michael Chugaj, arguing they had acted illegally by tipping off Indonesian police with that information.
Interesting.
The argument had been that the AFP breached a bilateral treaty that dictates such information can only be released by the Attorney General, but the court found that the treaty provision only applies once a person has been charged.
Oh,
so like a little loophole to that.
Mm.
Indonesian law does not require that arrested people be immediately charged with an offence, and by April 22, 2005, no charges had been laid. They're obviously still trying to work out what they wanted to charge each of them with. Police indicated that the 5 arrested at the airport would be charged with drug trafficking, which does carry the death penalty. Those arrested in the hotel would be charged with drug possession. That's a maximum of 10 years imprisonment. But criminal trials commenced in October. All defendants faced a maximum penalty of death by firing squad if found guilty for the charges that ended up being brought. Prime Minister John Howard said the Australian government would oppose any death sentences, saying we have a long-standing opposition to the death penalty. It's well known that if a death penalty is imposed on an Australian, we ask that the death penalty not be imposed. Didn't work.
No, my recollection was that the relations between Indonesia and Australia at the time weren't great. I mean, I can't recall. You know, there was obviously the Australian intervention into East Timor, which was not something the Indonesians were particularly happy about, which I think had happened, a few years earlier. I don't think we'd managed to patch up relations with them by that time.
Well, the Denpasar District Court judge called for Australians not to interfere. He said, or she said, criticism from outside is expected, but Indonesian courts will only adhere to the laws applied in this country, and that includes the death penalty. The judges will not budge. We will not be affected by public opinion or the media.
Sure, an appropriate thing for a judge to say, yeah.
Yep.
But you know, can you see again the absolute duplicity of Mick Keelty and the Australian Federal Police when the policy of the Australian government is that they are against the death penalty in all cases, and yet the Australian Federal Police absolutely dog the Bali Nine by just giving them up to the Indonesian authorities, knowing that they would face a death penalty or were likely to face a death penalty.
I don't know why they would have done that.
Well, I think
like
probably,
as you just said, relations between Indonesia and Australia weren't, at a high.
You've got to appreciate this is at a period in the Australian Federal Police when they had absolutely cocked up several high-profile investigations. There was the case of Martins, the pilot who was in Papua New Guinea, whose conviction was subsequently overturned. There was that case where they prosecuted the Attorney General from one of the South Pacific Island countries, and it was found the Australian Federal Police were giving the inducements to the witnesses. Yeah, it was a period of time where the Australian Federal Police were just being run appallingly.
Right. Okay, so I guess there was a lot in court put forward about threats that were made or just being a drug mule, not being part of any broader organisation. Didn't matter. They all got convicted. So the sentences were, as I said before, 20 years for Renee Lawrence, the death penalty for Chan and Sukumaran, life in prison for the others. They had some further legal challenges and appeals. Some sentences got altered and then reinstated, but the effective outcome was, as I said right at the start. So 2015, the executions were carried out. Apparently both of those men had made positive changes in prison. And, we talked about capital punishment. It's just abhorrent.
Absolutely.
So I just do feel for their families so much. Can't do a lot about cancer taking.
No. You wonder how much treatment that you get in Australia would have
made a difference. Maybe,
yeah.
I don't know. Some of them had criminal histories, nothing too substantial, but, some interactions with the law, and obviously one of them had outstanding charges.
In Australia, I think that was Scott Rush.
Right, right. Well, yes, he did have some criminal history from the Inala Magistrates Court, I found.
Oh, wow, there you go.
Yeah.
I've appeared out there.
So they're all back now, the 5 remaining. And Lawrence obviously is back as well. They have been taken to a facility in the Northern Territory, Howard Springs Accommodation Village. They're being put through medical checks. It was used for quarantine during the pandemic.
Yes, I recall.
And they will begin a voluntary rehabilitation process, Education Minister Jason Clare said. I don't know what that entails or how long they're going to stay at that accommodation centre. A private conversation between Anthony Albanese and the Indonesian president at the G20 summit, as well as consistent advocacy from the Albanese government, were the first steps to leading to their release, apparently. And Albanese said he was pleased to confirm the group's return and praised the Indonesian president for his act of compassion.
I wonder if part of the agreement on their return was that they face some kind of rehabilitation back here, because it seems a bit odd.
It was, I'm pretty sure. And they have all been banned for life from entering Indonesia.
I suspect they don't mind that.
Well,
it's my guess.
Probably
They're
not.
Quite happy not to go back.
But Schapelle Corby
has gone back.
But she's made it very clear she was not banned for life. She said she was banned for a period of time, but if she wanted to go back to Bali, she could.
Yeah, okay.
I don't think she has.
I don't think you would you?
All right. So I read an article that a journalist or a writer I really like, Madonna King, wrote about this. And she asked questions like, why are we so invested? And I think it comes down to the fact that a couple of them were really young, like 18, 19 years old. And she said, what kind of mistakes did we make at 18?
Yeah.
And what kind of mistakes might our kids be making? And they paid just this massive price for these mistakes. And I honestly, drug offending infuriates me. Like, drugs are so damaging. I've seen the damage they do to the people who take them, the people who buy them, to the families of those people, like addiction and overdoses, untold misery and harm. But at the end of the day, we don't deal with drug offenders in that harsh way.
No.
And I think that's why we do have an interest in their cases. So I will just give you a comparison.
Yes, give me some comparisons. So this is importation of marijuana into Australia.
Well,
heroin into Australia.
Yes. So in 2014, a man was sentenced for trafficking methamphetamine and heroin.
Okay.
114 grams.
Okay.
He got 4 years in prison.
Yeah, they had 8 kilos, didn't they?
They had 8 kilos.
Okay,
all right, so 2005, very similar time frame.
Yes.
A 30-year-old pleaded guilty to being in possession of 33.4 grams of heroin.
Okay.
Subsequent involvement in significant trafficking of heroin, prior convictions, and he got 5 years imprisonment with a non-parole period of 3.
You're joking.
Nope.
Wow.
2016.
I mean, I know people who've got like 20 years. And
I
stuff.
know. And there are some of those as well, but it could have gone either way in Australia. You know what I mean?
Geez, I don't know how. Obviously, yeah, interesting.
2016, a female pleaded guilty to trafficking of heroin, not less than large commercial quantities.
But that's trafficking. It's different from importation because one's a state offence and one's a federal offence.
But I'm just going to tell you that she only got 7 years for that.
Yeah. I have seen people stay out of jail on a trafficking offence. Pretty rare.
Really?
Yeah, very rare, I'd say. But it's possible. But, I mean, on an importation, particularly 8 kilos.
I know, it's a lot. It's a lot. They did the wrong thing. No two ways about it.
Yeah.
But they wouldn't have got, well, they definitely would all still
wouldn't
be
have
alive.
got life. Yeah. Off the top of my head, having not looked at any of the recent cases, I would have thought they would have been getting 15 to 20.
Yes.
And that's sort of what they did in terms of, having said that, they're obviously doing it in an Indonesian jail, which would be, I think, a lot harder than an Australian jail.
Yeah. So 19 years served for those Bali 5.
Yeah, they wouldn't. I mean, drug offenders here, once you're in jail, they're treated like, they're not treated as violent offenders, which means they can often get out to work farms quite quickly and low security quite quickly. And then once you're sure, it's jail, but I mean, I've been out to the work farms and, sometimes when things are a bit rough at home, I think, geez, I wouldn't mind a couple of weeks.
You cannot say that. Farm. You cannot minimise the fact that it's still prison. Yeah. But did I ever tell you, and we'll finish with this, but the case I saw of a guy who got charged with supply of, I think it was meth.
Yep.
And he had a little meth lab set up at his home.
Wow, okay.
And so he's in court and he was self-represented, I'm pretty sure.
Not sensible. Yep.
And the judge said, do you have anything to say? And he goes, actually, I do, Your Honour. And the judge said, yes. He goes, I just want you to know that I wasn't supplying it to anyone else. I just like to cook up 3 months worth at a time for my use.
Interesting.
And so that was all just personal use. And the judge said to the prosecution, can you refute that? And the prosecution are like,
no.
Well, no. And I said, all right, I'll sentence you on the basis of possession.
Nice.
Yeah.
Wow, that's excellent.
He's just like to plan ahead.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
I wonder if he baked his own bread as well.
Well, he might have got hungry. So I guess, look, I want to send a little message to our listeners, particularly our young listeners. Don't do drugs. It's never worth it. It is just so disastrous.
Yeah.
And I hope that all of these people who are now back free can live
move on with their lives.
Life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So there you go.
All right. Thanks, Lizzie.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you for listening to the episode. If you enjoyed it, please rate and review or like and subscribe. It all helps Lizzie and I keep this podcast going. If you're interested in clips, you can look at them on Instagram and TikTok. Just search for Justice Matters Pod. See you next episode.